Hello, I'm John Wolter, also known as Gunravan, and this is a presentation on Forget the Tavern, starting a campaign in media res, or in the middle of things. So, sort of just a brief background. I've been playing role-playing games for over 25 years, started back in 1981. I've been GMing for over 20 years, starting back in about 1986. And this was originally developed as a workshop for the One Shot Fridays Discord server, and the content for the workshop actually came out of a list of notes of advice that I've been creating over the years to share when someone would ask for alternatives to starting a campaign in a tavern in various gaming forums. So, what I'm going to cover in this presentation. Going to discuss how to start a campaign off with a bang in the middle of a challenge or in media res, and I'm going to explore we're going to explore a variety of methods to create a team of PCs with a shared history prior to the start of the campaign. So, as I begin talking about the problem of why I've created this set of notes in this presentation, this workshop, I really first want to note that, despite what the title says, there's nothing wrong with opening a campaign in a tavern. As I've kind of come to think about this question that people sometimes ask about, an alternative to starting in a tavern, the problem is not the tavern itself. The common problem is that the first scene of a campaign ends up focusing on the players introducing their player characters to each other, and the players trying to figure out why their player characters should band together, or if there's a defined reason for such. For them to come together, such as they're hired by someone else, how they fit together as a group. Essentially, they have no shared history with each other. They might be, and oftentimes, actually, many campaigns that when they start in a tavern, is the player characters don't even know each other. They come together for the first time, and that, as I said, that scene is focused on the player characters meeting each other. At best, the start is slow. Maybe even awkward as everyone tries to figure things out, like who they are in relationship to each other, why they should be adventuring together, etc. At worst, it risks being boring. Let me explain. So I have two examples that I want to talk about, both campaigns that I've was a player in that was started. The first one I want to call Taller the Outsider. So I both want to note that both times while I'm using the examples, the GMs with these campaigns were actually excellent GMs, and the campaigns are great. I think these illustrate some of the problems I'm getting at with this, and why I have this presentation, and why I think we ought to think about how to start campaigns off with a bang. So Taller the Outsider. Essentially, we were playing. Group of us came together in a tavern, and we had sort of established the idea that we were all going to be investigating strange phenomena. We were actually playing the One Ring set. We were actually playing Hobbits in the Shire, so it's Tolkien's Middle Earth, and so we were going to be investigating sort of mysteries and superstitions set in the Shire, and so it's going to be a very low, not a high combat campaign or anything like that. But we all were started off in a tavern, and so when we're in the tavern, we hear one of the proprietors talk about a mystery, strange sightings of ghosts connected to a legend of the Shire. And so, of course, we all sort of, because we knew this was the campaign frame, we all came together, and we finally realized, oh, we're all sort of interested in this, and so we're gonna, make plans and go investigate. Now, 3 of the 4 players did this. One player had a character who just sort of sat off to the side, didn't say anything, and after we made all these plans, one of the players and I knew each other. We were back channeling each other. We were playing on Discord, and we're like, trying to get this other player engaged. And we all decided, we're going to split up. We're going to go to bed because we're in this rural tavern on this rural inn, and that we're going to go to bed and get up in the morning and go off and investigate. And expecting this player to do something, the player describes their character just walking out of the common room and outside. And so my friend and I back channel each other. We're like, so I guess this person's not interested. No, stuck around that morning. Their character was there waiting for us. Had said nothing to the rest of us the whole time. So it was like, as players, it was kind of awkward because we were like trying to figure out what was going on. Now the player wanted to play an outsider, and we're hobbits in the Shire and Tolkien's Middle Earth, and this character was like very much an outdoors hobbit. Doesn't feel comfortable in buildings, sort of is treated as an outcast because kind of like stands out from the rest of Hobbit society, and the player sort of like the character is both feels like an outcast and is treated like an outcast, and so sort of the whole thing was actually the player was going to sort of integrate the character, like we would sort of develop connections, and the character would become more comfortable with the rest of the player characters, but we as players didn't know this, and it was just really weird. And that's an extreme version of this sort of characters not knowing, like kind of trying to figure out how they all fit together. But we have examples of that. There's because there is if you probably maybe you've probably experienced a campaign where you're trying to figure out how everyone fits together, what's going on, and we outsiders are a common thing. But the problem with like playing an outsider, if you've got characters who don't have a shared history, they don't have pre-established connections other than just that they're players at the they're the characters of the players at the table. It sort of is weird. It can feel weird to the other players. And so, if you've got a pre-established thing, we all know, oh, this character is sort of an outsider, but they're sort of becoming more comfortable with us. We know that's what's going on, and we have some ideas about how that's sort of already been developing. That it makes things easier because we all know what's going on, so it's not awkward. But that's one of the benefits. I use this as an extreme example, but this idea of the various, all the players at the table know the characters need to work together and kind of form a group, but they don't know how they all fit together or why they fit together. The other example is what I call introduction boredom. So if the goal is to have your characters meet each other and that's the opening scene is the characters all meeting each other. I was in a campaign years ago, and so the GM sort of set the frame that we were all sort of working for a particular group. We didn't necessarily know each other. In fact, many of our characters didn't know each other, or we just knew each other by sort of like reputation, or maybe cross paths here or there. But we were not a group, and so we were told by a leader to show up at a safe house. And so the first character showed up at a safe house, and a couple minutes later, another character showed up, and then those two characters were supposed to role play meeting each other, and then third character shows up, and they were supposed to then role play the two characters who'd been there role playing meeting the new character and vice versa. And then a fourth and fifth character showed up. And then, I think there was a total of 7 of us. And I was the last character whose character was to show up. And by the time my character showed up, everyone else was like, do we really have to role play all the introductions again? Can this this new person just pretend they've all heard, we're telling them what's going on, and we just meet them, and they, tell us the relevant stuff they need to do, but I could tell, and no one wanted to role play. The first couple of people, they all sort of role played for a while. By the time I got there, everyone was just like, okay, that's who you are, great, let's go. And so this, everyone was sort of kind of bored by this role playing out this introduction, having to everyone meet each other over and over and over again. So again, these might be like more extreme examples, but they represent the problems, I think, of starting a campaign. When we talk about like alternatives to starting a campaign in a tavern, is that we're starting a campaign where the first scene, nothing's really happening. Player characters are meeting each other for the first time, but there's no dynamic sort of action, challenge, threat. There's no drama. Also, the idea that if the characters don't know each other, they're coming together for the first time. What is their connections to each other? Or if you say, okay, we all know each other, but what do we know about each other? What kind of like, but if they all know each other, if they know each other already, what history do they have together to sort of make those connections? And that's what this presentation, this is all about. So, my solution, again, start with a bang. Make your first scene about the player characters engaged in some memorable action. So there's some drama going on. And the other part to do this, the other component to this, is creating a shared history. I use what I call session 0.5 to engage in a series of activities in which the players and I cooperatively create a shared history with actual specific events and connections that exist from their time together before the campaign starts. Okay, so first going to start with talking about a bang. Openings, strong openings are important. They grab attention, they set a scene, they establish a tone. So rather than have your first scene about the PCs meeting each other and feeling their way through as a group, maybe you have them start off by they're chasing an orc war party, or they're being chased by an orc war party. Maybe I got one of the games I like to play is Knights Black Agents. So maybe and that's a game of super spies who would realize that there's kind of like X spies. Think like Jason Bourne, the Bourne trilogy, Mission Impossible, the movie Ronin with De Niro and Jean Reno. Something like that, but they're actually realizing there's vampires, and so a vampire conspiracy sort of running things. So maybe the player characters have just cornered a vampire they've been hunting for weeks. So you've got the established frame, they've got the shared history, which I'll talk about how to develop those elements, and you start them off saying, okay, there's this vampire you've been hunting for a couple of weeks is in this building, or whatever, and that's how it starts. Them trying to get this vampire. Maybe you start them off in a safe house that's immediately under attack, or maybe they are staying at an inn, and the inn is set on fire, and it's not. It's like the inn's not. You could just be the inn is on fire, or maybe someone has set a fire. Maybe someone's trying to kill the player characters. Maybe someone's trying to kill someone else in the inn. Maybe you start them off with a council where they actually, they've got this shared history, they've got goals, and they're doing something, and they need to actually start off with a high stakes meeting with a big NPC from whom they need to ask a favor, and who is reluctant to give them that favor, to grant that favor. Maybe you start them by dangling off of a cliff or a building as a dragon or an attack helicopter flies at them. So, in that case, you want to give them a place to hide. And then the beginning opening scene is them actually trying to avoid and hide from and get away from this dragon or attack copter or whatever it is. So when you do this opening scene, starting off with some sort of drama, action, a challenge, when I do this, I usually try to make these opening scenes, often make these opening scenes one-offs. So it's like they do the scene and then we move on to another adventure. So it's like ton of you might think like a lot of TV shows nowadays, they'll start off with like an opening scene or even movies, and then they kind of move into the main action. However, sometimes there's a through line, there's a connection to the main action. And when I do these scenes, I do try to actually look back to the shared history. So, for instance, in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about. Oh yeah, so so I look back. I'll talk about looking back in a second. So talk about look back to the shared history of the PCs and have it invoke somehow this opening scene invokes that in some way, and also look forward by foreshadowing events, future events, or story hooks that the player characters can engage with. So looking back, if you have created a shared history with your player characters, and again, I'll talk about that in just a few minutes, use that shared history as part of your opening scene. Connect the opening scene to the shared history, makes both the shared history and the opening scene more meaningful. So, you just don't have the player characters create this opening scene. It's actually tied to things that are happening in the world, the consequences of their shared, cooperatively created past actually has meaningful effects on the present. And so let's say, as an example, the PCs, as part of their shared history, confronted a cult of some sort. And so maybe this opening scene is the cult's response to that prior confrontation. It could be a direct attack, it could be an indirect attack. Maybe the cult is threatening a friend. But whatever it is, whatever sort of drama you want to use, but you find an appropriate villain from the past shared history who is seeking some sort of revenge. Or maybe the scene might be about that cult's further activities that the player characters learn about. It's not actually directly attacking them, but it reveals that this cult, maybe the player characters thought the cult was small, and they had taken care of it, and it turns out it's much bigger. Now, talking about one of my own campaigns, when I was establishing a D&D campaign, the player characters, as part of their shared created history, they actually and we'll talk about how the events of this, but they basically someone decided that they had confronted a cult, and they thought it was a small cult. They were working for a local government. It was a D&D game, and they've been working as like a troubleshooting team for months, and so they found this cult, they rooted it out, and they thought it was just a one-off cult. They thought it was like just a small group, and this opening scene to them sort of dropped these hints that this cult was actually much bigger than they thought it was, than they originally thought. They thought they had taken care of the cult. They got all the cult members. They were not even close. They sort of started to learn that the cult had permeated society. Um, and so that's sort of like, using the past, their shared history that they created themselves to link to future activities. So looking forward, if you're running a published campaign or have strong ideas about the direction of your campaign, you can look forward by actually, you know what's going to basically sort of how the sort of established campaign, especially if your published campaign is going to go, who are going to be some of the major non-player characters and what some of the themes are, so you can actually drop hints of those. And so the hints you put in, maybe it's just, maybe the people who are attacking them all have a tattoo or are carrying some sort of insignia that the player characters don't know what it means yet. But then much later on in the campaign, they come across this symbol, this tattoo, this insignia. They realize that it's actually tied to a group. They may not know, that there is. They just know that it represents the people, but they don't know that it's tied to this much larger element in the campaign in the future. Again, it could be a note. It could be a name. And again, those don't need to make sense in the moment. But what they're doing is they're foreshadowing future events. Likewise, if you're actually, if the published campaign has certain themes that the campaign hits, you can sort of start with those, drop some of those in this opening scene. Um, and if you don't have a strong sense where the campaign is going to go, you're running more of a sandbox type game, that's fine. And what you do then is you sort of drop some really strong details. Again, a very cryptic note, a name, maybe a symbol, and you don't know yet what they are. What you do is you actually just drop these things in there. You keep track of them, but that they exist. And later, once you gotta figure out where our direction is going with the campaign, you then retcon in the connection. So, your players are never going to know that you sort of established that connection. You just add it in. One example that I did with again, this was the same campaign that the D&D campaign the player characters had confronted the cult, was they had help. When they were under attack, this mysterious figure showed up and helped them fight them off, and then the mysterious figure disappeared. The mysterious figure showed up again a few sessions later, and then disappeared. In this campaign, there was basically the queen of the realm was in a magical sleep, and this is one of the themes I sort of let the players know at the beginning of the campaign. This was just a thing that how we were starting off with, like kind of because the realm is under threat, and part of the reason why the realm is under threat is this queen who's an elf who'd been living for literally like 500 years, was no longer in charge, and because she was in this magical sleep and things, so there were growing threats, and so that's what we knew the campaign was going to kind of be about, and what the threats were going to be was going to evolve naturally. But what happened was this was a 3-year long campaign. Around this, it was either the end of year 2 or the start of year 3, roughly. They revealed to them that this mysterious figure who they met in the very first scene and who helped them, and then a few sessions later helped them again. That mysterious figure was directly connected to the queen's magical slumber. And by figuring this out, they now knew started first getting the first important clues to how to save the queen, bring her out of her magical slumber. And it was really fun. I knew this was the case. They spent 2 years waiting to reveal that. And when I revealed it, everyone was just like, oh my God, it was really cool. It was one of the better moments I've had in my 25 years of role playing. So you can, again, these can just be free floating symbols that you retroactively tie in if you don't know where if you've got a sandbox game running. Okay, so making the start memorable, sort of wrapping up. The important thing to remember here is that you want to start off with an exciting, memorable opening scene. Involve conflict or a challenge, some sort of drama from the start the player characters must address. Look back by tying the opening scene to their shared history. Look forward by providing story hooks and allusions to major NPCs or other campaign elements from published campaigns. Or look forward by providing free-floating story hooks and allusions to major NPCs and potential threats and themes that you later retcon back into the game once you kind of figure out where your campaign is going. Okay, so that's the starting with a memorable scene for your campaign, for your first scene. The other part of this workshop, this presentation, is building a shared past, and I'm going to go through a series of activities. I think there's either 6 or 7 that I'm going to mention, and the benefits, what this does by kind of spending this session, what I call session 0.5, to build this shared past, is that again, it can avoid the potential awkwardness of players trying to understand why their PCs should band together, other than the fact that they are the player characters of the players at the table. It lets the players and their PCs jump right into the action because they feel like an established team with connections to each other. It's you could just start your opening scene with just a set of drama with some sort of challenge because they've worked together to develop a shared history. They've got connections to each other. They have memories that they share with each other of having done things, adventuring together. So, the point of session 0.5 is to build a shared past. You collaboratively build a shared past for your campaign. Um, and so to do this, what I do is when I run a session 0.5 is I establish the context. We either do this by either I give the context to the players, or they give we talk about what the elements of the context needs to have, and they sort of collaborative come up together, or we work together to do it. So it's, all three options work fine, but what you need to establish the context is a brief description of how long the player characters have known each other, and the general overview of what they've been doing together. So how long have they been together, and what generally have they done? And then um, the next part of once you have done that, once you've established the context, you can then work on the activities I'm going to describe to make these connections. So establishing the context again. Either you, the players, or you all together decide how long have the player characters been working together. What have they been doing at the time they've come together? And also, you might actually talk about how they came together. And you want to establish this context, and then you run the activities. So the session 0.5 activities. Again, a series of activities that you use to make the connections for the player characters have prior to the first scene of the campaign. Some of these connections, some of these activities were introduced to me by friends, other people who, GMs that I found very cool. Some of these are from published material, and when I draw from published material, I mentioned, and then some I just came up with on my own. So pick and choose whichever ones make most sense for your campaign, for you and your group. First activity, that was me. So you and the players use the context that you establish to write one or two sentence summaries. So everyone writes, so you're writing one or two sentence summaries, and all the players should write one or two of these summaries, and then you, as the GM, should either write one or two summaries per player. So that what you're doing is that in the end, you should have at least three of these summaries per player. And the summary should be written in the third person and not attached to any particular character. So then what you do is you as the GM read read the summaries out one by one, and you tell your players that you're going to read a summary, and any summary that sounds interesting to anyone, they can claim it. They claim it by saying that was me. And the rule is that they should only claim one until everyone has had a chance to claim one. And then you go back through, and then once everyone's claimed one, you can then have people claim a second one. And I usually do this where everyone has two. That was me. Little synopses, little moments that generally are the whole party knows. And this is why, again, I recommend having at least three per player. That way, that no one's the more likely that people are going to find something that's interesting rather than being just it's like, okay, I have to take the last one because it's the only one that's left. So you want to have at least three per player, and if you read through the series and no one claims, you still have people who need to claim stuff. You just go back through and read them again. So some examples. So this is again from that D&D campaign that I ran. They were off working for the government. One of their scenarios I told them they had done, it's like one of the things they had done as their backstory, is that they had been doing a survey of watchtowers along a border that was actually in the mountain range that was north of the kingdom. And while these first level characters, or pre-first level characters, were on this weeks long sort of survey, kind of census, going through checking on the state of all the forts, they at some point their mules were attacked by griffins, and they ended up saving one of the pack mules, and they saved it because someone charged and drove off the griffin with just a stick. Um, and another one of that was me's that got picked. They were also doing another activity for the government as part of their before we started the campaign, and at some point they came across a outdoor wedding ceremony, and they learned that the groom had no family. The groom was an orphan and had no one there as family, and so one of the player characters stood up and said, that was the scenario someone wrote, that someone stood up to serve his family for the groom during a wedding ceremony the party stumbled upon. And so some player character chose that. Another one, someone decided that they were running away from some adversaries. They were inside a building, and they decided they needed to flee the adversaries. They were being overwhelmed, and so as they ran out of the building, they slammed the door shut, and someone threw a dagger that miraculously slid between the door frame and the door, jamming it, so that the people who were chasing the player characters couldn't get out of the building, and the player characters were able to escape. And then someone accidentally insulted an important official, and someone won a barrel riding contest. When I first learned this, I learned this activity from a friend who ran a game, and like one of the things was that one of the player characters, someone got really drunk and was thrown in prison, or like thrown in jail for drunkenness, and we had to spend all our money to to bail the person out. Now, of course, like mechanically, it had no effect on the characters other than just a story. But so those are the kind of whatever. It can be humorous, it could be serious, it could be kind of something that someone might not be totally sort of ashamed of, in general sense, or just fun. So you have player characters develop these, and so what these do, they choose these two that was me activities. Then the player gets to decide, does this moment reflect something important about the character? Sometimes they resonate with the character, like, yeah, that's totally my character. That's totally what my character would end up doing. So this is part of my character. It helps sort of solidify for the rest of the group, for the players and the relationship, the characters' relationships to each other. This is who this character is. It can be that this that was me moment is actually an uncharacteristic act. It's something, spur of the moment, totally uncharacteristic of the character. So it becomes like a story, or something like, oh, that weird time, that crazy time so and so did whatever. Or it could be a moment that the player might decide that it's a moment that reflects a latent trait or characteristic the player will develop over time. So like, this, maybe this is something that my character could grow into. It's like, they did it, and having done it, they're sort of coming out of their shell in this way, and something to develop. So there's ways that the players can sort of integrate these into their character to sort of make their characters more developed, but they're also shared memories the group has of each other's actions and their history together. Um, so that was me as a shared experience. So sometimes these that was me activities become jokes. So the players and the player characters can sort of laugh about something. It's like, or there's a memorable story. So it's, for instance, the character who threw the knife and jammed the door. Like it's a miraculous sort of throw, just like a Hail Mary activity. It's like an act of desperation. Became so everyone sort of joked about it, but it was sort of like whenever they were in a tough situation, someone would say, "Hey, can you just do something like throw your knife at it again?" And everyone had fun and the laugh. Also, the pack mule. So the character who saved the pack mule from a griffin. The players actually asked if they could, because the pack mule was actually given to them by the government when they were doing it. But they asked, since they were still working for the government at the start of the campaign, it's like, can we keep having that pack mule with us? And I was like, sure. They named the pack mule Potato. And Potato became a major element in the campaign. I made that sort of scene of that someone chases off a griffin with a stick, as it was meant to be sort of like a cool moment that was just like a little one-off story, and it just became this giant thing. And these that was me. Not everyone, not every that would be that not every that was me experience is going to become this big thing, but some of them will. If you and so Potato again, they gave it the pack mule a name, Potato, and Potato was with them everywhere when they would get into combat, or when there was any sort of danger. They would ask, how's Potato? Who's protecting Potato? Is Potato threatened? And they would then describe their characters doing things to make sure the potato was okay. If they needed to go someplace potato couldn't, they would then discuss amongst themselves how they were going to make sure the potato was safe while they left potato alone. And if they ever forgot to take care of potato, someone would say, potato, and then the action would stop. Whatever we were doing would stop, and they would actually then describe, like kind of retcon what they did to protect potato. And, it also just seems like maybe they're at an inn. This actually also happened quite regularly. They would be, at an inn, they're like, oh, time, everyone would describe, doing the role playing in the inn, in the tavern, and they're like, okay, we're all going to go to bed. And one or more characters were like, I'm going to go check on Potato before I go to bed. They just, Potato became this character in the campaign. So it was something that tied the player characters together. Okay, so activity 2, what I call That Was Me boons. This is a variation on That Was Me activity, and what I do for That Was Me boons is that I write these, and I write like either 1.5 or 2 per character. So I want to have more than there are players, but I don't necessarily want to go to 3. I write between 100 and 400 words. They are some sort of memorable scene. It can be a weird moment. Often they actually are sort of like there's something significant. They're often the player characters. The player characters almost always by themselves. It's like something extraordinary happens generally. And what happens in this scene is that there is a one-use item of some sort, and it's kind of ill-defined what it is. It's like an object, but what exactly it does is not defined. Or they come across an NPC. They do, they somehow they interact with an NPC in a positive way. And so the boon is going to be, depending on what the scenario is and what it comes out of it, either the player character is going to have a one-use item they can use at any point during the campaign, or they have encountered this NPC who can show up or can be called upon when narratively appropriate once to offer some important kind of assistance. So again, as with the That Was Me activities, I read them through. Someone says, that was me, and then they get that boon. And the idea behind these one-use items or the NPCs scales with the power level of the campaign at the time of use. So if you're playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons where there is significant power scaling as the campaign goes on, then the effect of the one-use item or the ability of the NPC to do something may grow with time for that one-off time that's narratively appropriate. If you're in a game where the power levels don't change tremendously, like the player character gets some more skills, but you're like playing again Knights of Black Agents. Maybe the one-use item is but actually it may not scale. It may have the same sort of power at the beginning of the campaign as it would at the end, but possibly not. But that's the idea: is you kind of figure out, you kind of keep the stuff vague, and then you figure out when it might be of use. So like if the player characters are really having a problem. Like for a quick example, I ran a Empire of the Ghouls campaign published by Kobold Press, and in the Midgard world of Kobold and the Kobold Press, and the idea that the Empire of the Ghouls are these intelligent, free-willed ghouls called Darakul, who sort of rule ghoul society, and they live in an underground empire. And the player characters start above ground, and they sort of discover things are going on. And they have to go, take care of this issue. So one of the characters in this That Was Me boon encountered a stranger, and the stranger, so like they're off gathering wood. It was kind of dark. The stranger was sort of hooded. The stranger asked them to. They were going to heading towards a village, a couple of villages. And the stranger said, when you get to this village, please tell so and so that whatever the name of this person, like gave a name and said that it's fine, but will not be returning. And the characters were like, okay. And so, that was the idea. They did that. That was me Boone's story. Now, what happened was that this person had been killed and been turned into a Darakul. They were, because they were free-willed and intelligent, they were not evil, but they knew they couldn't go back home. And so what they did is they were send a message to their family. The player characters. So the idea was that the player characters would then meet this NPC at a moment of need when they were down in the ghouls' empire, and so this NPC was going to help them in some way, and so that's how that might play out. Okay, third activity, rumors and assumptions. I ask each player character or each player to write 4 or 5 rumors about their character or assumptions people make upon seeing them. And the idea is that these rumors and assumptions are things that the other player characters have heard about the character in question. Any number of them can be false, but at least one should be true. Now, I tell the players that they can let me know, they can let the party know what is true, or they can keep it secret. And then, actually, generally, they don't tell the other players which ones are true or not. And so they've got these, all the characters in the group know some stories, some rumors, some assumptions that other people make about each of the player characters, and these may not be true. So it gives like a little bit more texture to the characters, and and then some of the times these rumors or assumptions are something they did, and so it sort of gives the shared knowledge again about about the player characters have this shared history, the shared past about each other. Um, Another activity I often run is I think you're cool because, and in this I ask each player to, after the players have given a short narrative description of who their character is, I then go around the table and ask each other player to say something they think is cool about the character in question. I encourage. First rule, probably should have made this the second bullet point here, is that the player in question gets to veto any idea about their character that they don't like and ask for a new one. So no one can, so nothing no one's going to have something about their character forced on them. However, I do ask the players to spend a moment if they feel to think about the description that's given. Um, and so, I encourage the other players on the table to sort of use the description they've got to make something up and what they also know about the other character. And I ask the players who are getting having these descriptions put on their character to lean into them and to think about what they mean. Um, Maybe it's something the character doesn't realize. Because we all don't we all think differently about ourselves. We all have assumptions about ourselves, like our abilities, our talents, that other people are like, oh no, you're really skilled in this, or or yeah, you have this habit you do all the time, and that we don't realize, we don't recognize it ourselves. And so these suggestions can be that, and it gives us what this has a couple functions. One, um, the other players at the table are sort of creating some investment in everyone else's characters, because they're helping sort of create some reality about each of the other characters. But again, as I said again, each player can veto anything that's said about their character they just really don't like they don't think fits. And it also, so it does that, but also again, it gives the it helps again the players sort of develop this more nuanced, more textured sense of who their characters are, and that everyone shares together. So, but it does sort of build this, like I said, some investment connection between the player characters, that the players have like some sense of like, oh yeah, I've have a meaningful relationship. My character has a meaningful relationship with this other player character. Okay, activity 5, and we have just 2 left, is relationships. So this idea comes from Pelgrane Press's The Yellow King role-playing game, from Free League's Alien, the role-playing game, and from Free League's The One Ring. All 3 of these games, and there are many other games that do this as well, have a specific mechanic in which the player characters establish a special relationship between their characters and 1 or 2 other characters. So, in the Yellow King, each player is asked to choose another character that their character relies on. So you go around the table, say, okay, who do you rely on? And the idea is that everyone only relies on one other person. So, so everyone at the table has someone who relies on who. Every character has another character who relies on them. And then once you've done the who you rely on, you go in reverse order. So the person who went last gets to go first, and they identify which character they protect, that they have a special feeling of protection that they want to protect. And so what you do is you're sort of establishing these pre-existing relationships between the characters, so they know all the characters in the group have a relationship with other characters in the group. They're a cohesive band. So this is another way of sort of creating this sort of connection between characters. Why are they adventuring together? Because they actually come to recognize, they realize that one of the other members of the group they rely on, and one of the other members of the group they have the protective, a sense of a feeling of desire to protect. In the Alien role-playing game, they do this with buddy and rival. So one of the members of the group, one of the other characters of the group, your character has this particularly strong friendship with, and another character in the group your character has a rivalry with. And in Alien, you actually, especially if you're playing one shots, which they call cinematic rather than campaign mode, there's actually in one shots there actually could be player versus player um, combat. So like player versus player activity. That's actually because part of the Alien role playing game based off the Alien movie franchise is that everyone has secret agendas and just things are going to hell. And so and the story is about how everything goes to hell, and maybe someone survives. And so part of that is that you may actually have player versus player combat or activity, and so the rivalries may actually sort of help lead to that. On the other hand, if you're playing a campaign mode or you're playing a more friendly game where you don't really want player versus player um, activity, the rivalry could be a friendly rivalry. And so basically they sort of they're in competition with each other in a positive way. And so like say in the Lord of the Rings, especially the movies, you actually have Gimli and Legolas have a rivalry. They're actually whenever they're in combat, they're actually counting how many they individually kill, and they're trying to outdo each other. And so that is an example of a friendly rivalry. And then in the One Ring, the role-playing game, every character chooses a fellowship focus. And in the One Ring, the fellowship focus actually has a mechanical benefit. Um, so while the Yellow King and the Alien, the mechanics here is just to create connections between characters. The One Ring has a mechanical benefit. Basically, in the One Ring, you actually help other characters by spending a hope point. Hope you could spend for basically get a bonus die, and you could spend hope for your own rolls, or you could spend hope for to activate magical successes, or you could spend hope to um, help other player characters. And so normally when you help another player character, it's one extra die to the roll. If it's your fellowship focus, you get to add 2 dice. They get to add 2 dice to the roll for the help roll. And so taking this idea, so I call it sometimes maybe party focus if you're not playing the One Ring and you don't want to call it the fellowship focus. What you might do is whatever mechanic is for your game or help adds a benefit, you have this particular mechanic that's be house ruled is that it has a limited use. I usually would do if I'm not playing the One Ring where they have the mechanics, the resource economy of hope is built into the game. I might say, okay, you can invoke the party focus once per game, and that gives a bonus. And the bonus is whatever is relevant to the game. So if you're playing a game where you get to roll lots of pools of dice based on your skill rating, then maybe it's an extra die. If you're playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, because it's you buy because help already gives you advantage. Maybe it gives you advantage plus 1 or 2 points to the die roll. And again, if for games where you don't where you can just help normally without sort of a resource economy involved, I would do this. I would limit this particular party focus to once per session. Okay, the last activity: X must die. So in Pelgrane Press's role-playing game, the Gaian Reach, the premise of every campaign is the same. Each player character was horribly wronged by Quadros Vord. Each player character believes that the only revenge appropriate for the being wronged is to kill Quadros Vord. And at the start of the campaign, the group is already banded together because in their pursuit of Quadros Vord, they have all encountered each other, and they've all come to realize that each of them has been wronged by Quadros Vord, and each of them is pursuing Quadros Vord to kill him, and therefore they've all banded together to pursue and kill Quadros Vord. That's how the campaign starts. And as part of this, you create a backstory. Each player character gets to make one true statement that their character knows about Quadros Vord. So the player characters all get to describe one true thing about the person, whatever they're pursuing. So, how you can use this. Obviously, this creates a very specific kind of campaign you may or may not want. But it can be a fun campaign. And so I use, using X must die. So X is the Quadros Vord stand-in for your campaign. This X is Quadros Vord stand-in. It could be an individual, it could be an organization, it could be a government, it could be whatever you want it to be. And the one true thing statements don't have to be the whole truth. It is true. So you let the player characters make a true statement about X. But it doesn't have to be the full truth. So for instance, a player character may know that decide that X is um, a person, so they believe that X is an individual, and X, they say something about X, X hangs out at this, like likes to hang out at this place, or X, likes some rare thing, and so maybe they can trace down by seeing who's buying this rare thing, or maybe even try selling it and see if X shows up. Um, Maybe they learned that this X, this person that they thought, they described, is not an individual. But an agent who was working for an organization or for the big bad person for your game, and that whatever the wrong that happened to them was actually just the person who did it was just following orders. So this is, again, an example of how the one true thing doesn't need to be the whole truth. The player character may say, yeah, so let's pretend the name is Steve. So Steve um, likes Pokemon, like a particular Pokemon card. I don't know. It's like a contemporary game of some sort. And then, maybe we could try selling the Pokemon card, or, find to try to trace who's been selling such cards and who's buying them, because the person wants to collect all this rare card. And so, but they then, they learn this, they get X, they think they're on the trail, they then corner this individual, and they're like, yes, we've got we've got Steve. And then they realize, no, actually, Steve was just a cog in a wheel. Steve was just whatever wrong Steve did to that particular player character was actually just serving this larger thing, the big baddie, the organization. And the other player characters may have been wrong by Steve. They may have been wrong by someone else that they then assume is Steve because of what they sort of all know. So, so again, the one true thing statement doesn't need to be the whole truth. Okay, so that is, some of the activities. I've got 6 activities for you. They can all be fun to sort of establish this pre-existing history. Like I said, because the players develop this pre-existing history for the campaign, for their characters, then they have moments. They actually have moments of memory that they, as a group of them acting as a group, that they share with each other, and those may come about as things that actually happen in the campaign, like are become story elements, like Potato, the pack mule. It's something that's there all the time. It could be just something that they laugh about. It could be a story that they tell each other at like in down times when they're role playing. And so what it does is by doing these activities, you give the players a framework in which their characters have been together. It's not just, you don't just tell them you've all been together for the last 3 months. They have a sense that they have been together and that they know each other's characters. And then by doing that, you can just throw them into action. You can throw them into some sort of drama, some sort of challenge, because they don't need to introduce themselves to each other. They don't need to figure out who they are as a group. And so then when your campaign starts off with a big bang, starts off with excitement. And you can tie that opening scene of excitement, of drama, to their past shared histories, which then gives them the sense that their existence in the world is dynamic, and that they're connected to the world. And you can then also look forward. You can drop story scenes. You can drop future connections, foreshadow events, NPCs. Whether it's a published campaign where you know what you're dropping, what these elements you're dropping are connected to, and again, the players and their characters don't need to understand what the things mean at this opening scene. They exist to later reveal to them, and they're like, oh my gosh, that thing at the beginning is connected to this stuff. Or so if it's a published campaign, or you really know kind of where your campaign's going to go, you can then drop things you know. If you are playing a more sandbox game, you can just create these strong descriptive things that are vague and cryptic, that you then retcon once your campaign's been going for a while, and you said, oh yeah, I'm going to pull this in. This might be a cool place to connect this thing from the opening scene to kind of make it part of a story seed, a story hook that the characters, if they realize, oh my gosh, this is a symbol that of the that the person's got a tattoo of these people that we first encountered in their very first scene that's clearly connected, and we need to figure out what's going on. You've got a pre-existing story, story hook that the players are going to take. Very few characters, like if they actually it's connected to something that's already happened, rather than like it's a rumor they've heard, like oh maybe we're going to follow this rumor, maybe not. It's like these people attacked us. Oh my gosh, this person is connected to these people. Let's go figure this out. And so these by starting off with this big bag, having this embedded connections to the world, both looking back to their shared history, looking forward to future events, and establishing a group that sort of knows each other, works with each other, has where the characters or the players feel that their characters have connections, um, uh, actually memories of their interacting with the other members of the group as a pre-existing group. And they're more likely to just sort of gel together and jump in and just role play, and because they've got stuff to role play off of, rather than having to wait a few sessions before they start having activities they can then refer to each other together. They've got that shared history already. Okay, so in the the comment section, I'm going to have posted a link to a Google Doc that will have it's a 5-page Google Doc right now that will have more sort of like the principles sort of written down, and sometimes described in more detail than I talk about here. And I have right now the Google Doc is open for commenting, so you can add comments if you want. And if you would like me to sort of weave in your ideas into the Google document, I'm happy to do so. But please let me know how to attribute to you. So like if you leave a comment where you want me to attribute this idea to you, please kind of give me an idea of what you want me to write, and how you want me to attribute you, and then I will weave it into the document and remove your comment. But if you just have a comment that you want to add, I'll leave comments as well, as long as you're not sort of vulgar or mean or something like that. But I'm happy for criticism, or for for feedback to make things to make this better. So, like I said, there'll be a link to the Google Doc, and that's this. Thank you very much.